We knew they were going to try everything to try to get Donald Trump reelected. And the next step is sabotaging the post office. And this is super important to know about. So, yes, Donald Trump floated yesterday the idea of delaying the presidential election. Unlikely to happen. He doesn't actually have the power to do it. He can mess up the post office pretty badly, and that's what he's trying next. So to set this up, coronavirus hits, but we know we have an election coming up in November. Okay, simple solution, you vote by mail. And when we say vote by mail, we don't mean some new system. We just mean expanding absentee ballot access to anybody that wants an absentee ballot. Whether or not coronavirus is under control in November, we don't know. It's increasingly looking like it's going to be out of control, but we expand absentee ballot access to everybody. We've got a solution for a safe election. Trump is against it. Trump is against it because he says there will be fraud. Trump doesn't understand that vote by mail is the same in this case as just absentee. We're not talking about a different system. He's either confused or he's lying or he's distorting or whatever. We don't know. Well, governors mostly, fortunately, take matters into their own hands and they expand absentee ballots. They, in some states, say everybody can get one. In others, they say you still have to have a valid reason for requesting an absentee ballot, but fear of catching coronavirus counts as a valid reason. Some states are doing other types of expansions, but for the most part, governors do the right things. So what is Trump's next move? Well, he's trying to neuter and kneecap the post office. Donald Trump has appointed Louis DeJoy to be Postmaster General. DeJoy just happens to be a huge Trump donor who wants to see Donald Trump reelected. And DeJoy has announced that he's going to eliminate overtime for hundreds of thousands of postal workers. Overtime widely expected to be needed as we have a record number of people opting to vote absentee rather than in person, which could delay mail services and, of course, prevent the delivery of the ballots. In other words, Trump, through his Postmaster General, is trying to cause the very problems that he cited as the reason why we shouldn't have vote by mail. Louis DeJoy is also considering closing a bunch of post offices across the country. And DeJoy is using kind of coded language to try to hide his intentions, saying things like, well, listen, we haven't done any kind of reform in the post office for a long time. We're going to take a fresh look at the operations of the Postal Service. This is all code. Now, we know that because of coronavirus and because we know that absentee ballot access has been expanded in a bunch of states around the country, there will be way more absentee ballots this year than arguably in any prior year. And we are just a few weeks from the start of that. Remember, 4.5 weeks from now, some states start voting absentee. So what do they want to do? Cut the post office. This is completely obvious. 3 months before an election, Trump puts in a big donor to run the post office. And immediately, Trump's donor says, whoa, 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 stop the clock. Let's reduce mail service. What? People are emailing me saying, how is this legal? That's a great question. This is extremely authoritarian, something we're now used to with Donald Trump. This is another example of regulatory capture. And this is another example of the right wanting to suppress turnout. If you can't stop people from going to the polls as easily, because lots of people are going to be voting by mail, prevent their ballots from being delivered by hurting the post office. This is the strategy. And it should be mentioned, sometimes I point out Democrats and Republicans are both part of maintaining this status quo, or they're both mostly on board with expanding the military budget or whatever. This is not a both sides issue. For, is it 20 years? Is it longer? The right has had the strategy of trying to hold down turnout in certain areas to try to win elections. The left doesn't do this. The left doesn't consider as a top strategy for winning elections, let's figure out how to prevent people from voting or how to prevent people's votes from counting. So first of all, number one, we have to so overwhelm the vote that these strategies won't work. I've been saying that for a year or longer, and I hope that now everybody understands why it's true. Secondly, there is a maybe possible backfire effect here. So right now, red states have been way more hit by coronavirus than blue states for now. This could mean that red states are doing more online shopping because it's safer to go shopping in blue states than red states. And so hurting the Postal Service might actually anger more Republicans than Democrats. Now, whether they'll link it to Trump's postmaster and hold Trump accountable is another story. Remember that when Obamacare passed and Republican governors opted not to do the Medicaid expansion, a lot of those red state voters blamed Obama, even though Obama gave the governors the tools. It was the governors who opted not to do it. They may not actually hold the right people accountable, but they are doing it. They're doing it right now. This is not a dress rehearsal. And that is almost going to be everybody must vote. And this is not a dress rehearsal, or very quickly becoming the phrases of the next 3 months. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top infectious disease doctor in the country, who has been trying to run a coherent coronavirus response and has been fighting against the White House in order to do it, is now begging and pleading with Americans to just listen to science, understand and accept what's going on. And it's like reasoning with little kids, unfortunately, in much of this country. Here he is on MSNBC, again having to explain that we have a process for studying whether a drug works and that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work.
Follow the science. If a study that's a good study comes out and shows efficacy and safety for hydroxychloroquine or any other drug that we do, if you do it in the right way, you accept the scientific data. But right now, today, the cumulative scientific data that has been put together and done over a number of different studies has shown no efficacy. So when there's a video out there for a bunch of people spouting something that isn't true, the only recourse you have is to be very, very clear in presenting the scientific data that essentially contradicts that.
We have such an education crisis in this country. We have such a media literacy problem in this country that the top infectious disease doctor is having to spend a non-negligible amount of time just explaining to people, we know how to study whether a drug works. And this one doesn't work. You shouldn't be taking it. And meanwhile, Trump is insisting it's good. Congressman COVID, Louis Gohmert, says he's taking it now that he has coronavirus. And this is how Dr. Fauci is having to spend his time. Trump is still doing this. In the last 48 hours, Trump said the following.
I wasn't making sense. It's recommendations of many other people, including doctors. Many doctors think it is extremely successful. The hydroxychloroquine, coupled with the zinc and perhaps the zithromycin. But many doctors think it's extremely good, and some people don't. Some people, I think it's become very political. I happen to believe in it. I would take it. As you know, I took it for a 14-day period, and I'm here, right? I'm here.
They seem to now see everything as a matter of opinion. It's all political. Your opinion is hydroxychloroquine works. My opinion is that it doesn't. These are just differing opinions. The obvious hypocrisy here is that it's the right that has come out waging this battle against what they call postmodernism from the left. They claim, the left thinks words don't mean anything anymore. Everything's just opinion. There's no more real truth. And yet they come out and then say, well, our opinion is hydroxychloroquine works. When it comes to what do the words man and woman mean, the right says the left is playing too fast and loose with definitions and what things mean. And yet here they are saying just a matter of opinion if hydroxychloroquine works. Some people believe it doesn't. Some people believe it doesn't, as if science and medical studies don't have anything to tell us about it. If their opinion is that a mask could cause harm, or as Congressman COVID said a couple days ago, give you coronavirus, then we have to say, well, their opinion is theirs, and then we might have scientific consensus, but in the end, it's all just opinions. This is dangerous. This is dangerous far beyond the coronavirus situation that we're dealing with right now. And this is also another problem I've spoken of in the past, the idolizing of people over process, the idolizing of a cult of personality when it reigns supreme over understanding how we come to know things. And that's an issue we've been talking about for years. In the United States, these are estimates, maybe 60% of the population will listen to science because they understand how it works. The other 40% is a combination of people who sort of listen to science, even though they don't really know how it works, but it's sort of just like an argument from authority for them. and then an amalgam of people who will follow their religion or what they believe their religion says, or their cult leader. In this case, the cult leader can be a political figure. And this is unique to the right. Imagine for a moment, Joe Biden were president, coronavirus hits, and Joe Biden comes out and says, you know, doctors say hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, but I think it does. You should take it. You're not going to see a lot of leftists go and say, Joe Biden said hydroxy works. I'm going to take it even though doctors say no. This is a phenomena of the American right. It does not exist in the left to any kind of significant degree. And this is a cult-like aspect of the right in the United States. And it's not just the type of thing we talk about in academic settings. This is causing very real and concrete problems. And if you think it's bad now with this hydroxychloroquine stuff and the mask fiasco, just wait until a vaccine comes out, which maybe is 60, 70% effective, but 40% of the country may refuse the coronavirus vaccine, as some studies expect will happen. 40, 45% of the country may opt not to get a coronavirus vaccine once it is available. Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at @dpakman. And remember, you can get the daily audio podcast every day. You don't have to watch the short YouTube clips if you prefer a long form audio format when you're working out, when you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, gardening, your zooks and cukes, maybe like me. Grab the audio podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, whatever your favorite podcasting app is.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Colin McGinn and Darren White. Thanks to Colin and Darren for your support. Also, today's longtime sustaining member of the day is Frankie Perdue. Frankie's been a member almost 5 years. Really appreciate your support, Frankie. Join these great people. This is my please clap moment. Please join at joinpakman.com. If you like the normal prices for membership, by all means, sign up. If you don't like them, take advantage of the coupon code This Is 2020, which will save you 40% off of the cost of a membership. Let's go to the phone lines. The phone lines are hopping today. See what's on folks' minds. The number is, of course, 617-830-4750. Let's start with our caller from the 828 area code. Caller from 828, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yes, hello. This is Patrick. I'm calling from near Asheville, North Carolina.
What can I do for you, Patrick?
I had a sort of proposal for you to encourage accelerationists or revolutionary leftists to vote for Joe Biden.
Okay.
I would propose that Joe Biden is actually the accelerationist candidate.
Of the two candidates that are available, or Joe Biden is actually an accelerationist candidate?
Of the two that are available.
Okay.
Because if you're familiar with the J-curve theory of revolution, that revolutions happen when expectations don't meet reality. So if Trump gets elected, everyone will expect things to get worse and become more authoritarian.
Yes.
If Joe Biden gets elected, people will expect things to get better, but I would say they won't get that much better, and that might be more likely to cause a revolution than if Trump gets elected.
That's very interesting. So to say it another way, Patrick, the idea is if Trump wins and people expect the world to get worse, and it does, expectations and reality will be aligned, and often that will not cause dramatic change. On the other hand, if people vote for Joe Biden, and other than the accelerationists, I guess, A lot of people believe things will get better if Joe Biden is elected. They might not be great, but they'd be better. If it then doesn't happen, it might actually catalyze a demand for more significant change, is the idea.
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know. Listen, I don't know that I believe it. So what you're basically saying is, would this be a way to convince the sort of never Biden people to vote for Biden, the revolutionary left to vote for Biden? But it's something I don't actually believe will happen. I don't know if it's honest to use trickery, but it's certainly an interesting idea.
It's more of a possibility. I mean, if you're looking at odds are better for Joe Biden in that either he makes things a lot better, and that's good, things get a lot better, or they only get a tiny bit better, which could also be good if you're an accelerationist, and that change will happen more likely.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, I'll propose it. If I get one of these revolutionary leftists calling in, I'll certainly propose it to them and see what they say.
Okay, thank you. And I had one other quick question.
Sure.
When you're speaking in Spanish, would you pronounce your name David or David?
Well, in Spanish, it's David. Yeah.
I would just say when AOC becomes president, you might need to explain what code switching is, and that might be an example of that. You can easily...
Sorry, I might need to. You're breaking up, Patrick. I might need to explain what when AOC is president.
Code switching.
Code switching. Okay, well, yeah, that's something to think about. Patrick, thank you for the call. Very much appreciate it. Let's go next to our caller from the 661 area code. Who's calling today from 661?
Hey, David, longtime viewer here from Lancaster, California, and I just had a quick question for you.
Sure.
The rhetoric that Trump and his campaign has put forth since his election, since he started running in 2015, I feel as though it's directly led to a rise in deaths of despair in America, alcohol, liver disease, suicide, drug overdose, and also just overall violent crimes, hate crimes, things like that. And I actually wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, no, I have no particular thought. I mean, so there's a couple different sides to that. So deaths of despair often are related to economic circumstances. And certainly it would be a counterpoint to the idea that before coronavirus, things were better than ever, because if things were better than ever, you would not expect many of these deaths of despair to be on the increase. Now, in terms of the hate crimes and crimes targeting religious minorities or ethnic minorities or whatever the case may be, I've said before, I don't think Trump has created racists or xenophobes, and whether Trump is personally racist or xenophobic is less relevant. What matters is Trump has made existing racists and xenophobes more comfortable to be out in public with their views and has emboldened them. And so it's also not particularly surprising. But I think the deaths of despair are sort of a different phenomena than some of these hate crimes and other violence.
Okay, I appreciate the answer, and big time fan of the show, and hope you have a good day.
All right, thank you. Yes, that was the audio quality there was brutal. I apologize for that. Let's go today to our caller from the 250 area code. Who's calling today from 250?
Hey, David. My name is Ashwin. I'm actually calling from Canada. I'm up in Victoria. I'm not sure if you know where that is. It's just a couple hours north of Seattle.
Okay, a couple hours north of Seattle. What's going on today?
Actually, I have a quick question for you. I don't know how quick it is, actually, but so I think that you're probably aware, too, that like the eviction crisis is looming over pretty soon here, probably in the next couple months, if not the next month.
Yes.
And I was wondering what you think of strategically withholding rent as a tactic, and how do you think that would pan out in the U.S., or how effective do you think that would be?
So I'm glad you're asking this. I've talked about, I've done a bunch of segments, and there's one in particular about types of activism where I've said, calling your representatives is great. Signing petitions online I don't think it really does anything. But that activism tactics that may get more attention would be mass rallies in urban centers, strategic defaults of debt of different kinds, which could include coordinated non-payment of mortgages, coordinated non-payment of rent, etc. I think the complexity right now is it wouldn't just be activism. Like there's 32% of people were unable to pay their entire mortgage or rent on July 1st. So what we're talking about is an actual economic crisis in which a third of the country wasn't able to fully make their July 1st payments. And then adding on top of that, another element of this happening strategically during a time when there may be an extended eviction moratorium or there may not. It's unclear. They're talking about it, but it's not clear a deal is actually going to get done. So it's extremely speculative what would happen in this particular case. The idea for people to understand of saying nobody pay your mortgages, nobody pay your rent, is that if everybody really did it, and of course, everybody would never do it. There's a huge part of society that would say, I'm fine. I'm not going to get involved in this. I'm not going to hurt my credit or whatever. But if a large enough portion of society withheld mortgage and rent payments, you would instantly cripple the financial industry with a massive liquidity crisis. It would probably force the government to have to, in the short term, put in a crazy amount of money to keep these financial institutions afloat. And the idea would be it would bring stakeholders to the table to actually negotiate some of the change that people want. Now, agreeing on what the change people want is a whole other issue and brings complexity, but it's an interesting idea. I don't know what adding a strategic default on top of an existing eviction and foreclosure crisis would really do, a potential one. But it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I think quickly, I think it would pan out a lot worse in Canada, where there is a little bit more of a social net for people. But I think in America, I don't know if the social net is quite there. So I think the view on it would be a little more positive in certain places versus other places, right? So that's why I was asking you how you thought it would pan out in the U.S. But yeah, I really appreciate your response.
I mean, listen, if it happened, if you had a significantly coordinated mortgage and rent default in the United States, it would immediately become hyper politicized, where it would be, attacked by the right as just grifter, lazy people on the left who don't want to pay their bills and so on and so forth. The left would likely hail them as doing something really good in order to inspire change, potentially at their own economic peril. And it would become, honestly, just like everything else, where it would become hyper partisan. And I don't know how far we would get with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree with you there. Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thank you for the call. Very interesting question. I appreciate it. Let's go next to our caller from the 616 area code. Who's calling today from 616?
Hey, David, am I on?
Yes, you are. Who's this?
My name is John Paul Jones. I'm from Western Michigan, and I just wanted to bring up a bit of an interesting point I've been thinking about.
Now, hold on. Did you say your name is John Paul Jones, like the great bassist?
The great who?
Isn't Led Zeppelin's bassist John Paul Jones?
No. I'm not sure. The person I'm most familiar about with that name is John Paul Jones, the famous historical sailor.
I got it. Okay, very good. All right, we'll go on.
I was just it's been about 3 months ago, Jesse Ventura announced that he was considering running for the Green Party presidential nominee, but eventually, due to some sort of a potential health problem, he was forced to drop out. But here's the thing: I actually think the situation right now, Al, is so bad where we could use a Green Party candidate might actually stand a chance this year. And I'm thinking that if Howie Hawkins surrenders to the Green Party nominee to Jesse Ventura, assuming his health problem has gone away, the Green Party may actually have a chance of winning some states, or if things get so bad, maybe even even the presidency.
No.
what-
So
what
John
things-
Paul Jones, let me. So there is absolutely no chance that a Green Party candidate wins a single state. There is no chance of that whatsoever. Joe Biden is polling over 50% in a huge number of states and nationally. And really, the only thing a Green Party candidate might do would be hand a state where it's close to Donald Trump. So a Green Party candidate would not win a single state, and they certainly would not win the presidency at this point.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was just okay. Okay. I was just thinking about that because
Yeah.
things are just so are so nuts in the U.S. right now that when things get bad, people can usually get desperate and
Yes. You're thinking about all the right
so-
things. Things are bad, but no, the Green Party in this election could only potentially be a major spoiler. So let's get Trump out of there. Let's get Joe Biden in. That's the next step. All right. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the call. We're going to go to a very brief break. It's going to feel so short, but then we'll be back with more phone calls. So please don't hang up if you are on hold, because we are going directly back to the phones.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Let's get back to the phones at 617-830-4750. I want to talk to our caller from the 202 area code. Who's calling today from 202?
Hi, David. This is Rachel from the Maryland suburbs of D.C.
Love it. And Rachel, you don't have us on speakerphone, do you?
I do not. You are on a headset. Are you unable to hear me?
You know, it's okay. I think we can deal with it.
Okay. So my question to you is around the corporate liability shield. It seems like that's McConnell's red line, and he doesn't care about anything else. My question to you is, do you think this is something the Democrats might cave on? I mean, some have kind of postured around not, that being a non-starter. But, I mean, basically the language that was submitted came from, Cuomo's liability shield that he, put in New York, he used in New York.
So Rachel, let me explain to people first what you're talking about so people know. So the idea here is Donald Trump floated this starting a couple of months ago. The idea is a liability shield for businesses who reopen, where they would not be subject to a lawsuit or criminal or civil proceedings of any kind if people catch coronavirus at their place of business. It could be employees and it could be customers. The idea being, if a business thinks, wait a second, if my employees get sick or customers get sick, I could get sued, they'd be less likely to open. So Donald Trump saw it as a way to really encourage businesses to open. I would have, my answer 2 weeks ago, Rachel, might have been more definitive. At this point, I think everything is on the table. I think given what's going on and given how far apart the negotiations seem to be, Democrats more than Republicans seem extremely eager to get money to people and get money in people's hands that they might be willing to concede. I would not, it's a question mark for me. I wouldn't put anything past anyone at this point, particularly when you've got an election in 3 months. And so a lot of the players who are up for re-election in the Senate are going to be thinking about what they're willing to do versus what they're willing to give up in order to facilitate getting reelected as well. So it's a crapshoot right now. Anything could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just very concerned that it could lead to a potential spike, because once you have people who are absolved of liability, then their interest in trying to do everything they can to maintain worker and consumer safety becomes a little lax. I mean, we saw what happened in the nursing homes in New York. So I'm just, that's really what, is concerning to me, is that could it lead to a further spike?
Well, listen, the answer is yes. And of course, we may be on the way to a further spike anyway. And we were supposed to have a break between wave 1 and 2. It's not clear that's going to happen. So yeah, all these factors are going to add. It's looking like it's going to be a very difficult fall in the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, David.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate the phone call. Let's go next to our caller from the 206 area code. Who's calling today from 206?
David, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Who's this?
Pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Logan Rogers, originally from Florida, but currently living in Seattle.
Love it.
Got kind of a setup for you. Thank you. Got kind of a setup for you with a little bit of just, I want your opinion on something that's been personally going on politically in my life. But very recently, I had a couple friends of mine that I moved out from Florida to move into my house in Seattle. And I've known the man for good 4 or 5 years, and he has a girlfriend. And we recently had a little bit of a, quarrel over this whole Black Lives Matter protest thing.
You and the girlfriend had a quarrel.
Yeah. She's from Ohio, and he's from Florida, and he's got, progressive politics. They both do. But she just couldn't get over the fact that property damage was being occurred because of these protests, and that she basically didn't really approve of it. And I made the point to her, because she was one of the people being not all cops are bad people. There's a lot of good cops. And I tried making the point to her that if you have 3,000 good cops that do good things and 4 bad cops that do really, really bad things, and those 2,000 cops don't say anything about that, you still have 2,004 bad cops. And she took it extremely personally, because she has a lot of police in the family, and basically thought that I said that her dad was a racist that kills black people.
Okay.
And they haven't talked to me in about 3 months now, and they moved out, and it's really, really been kind of hard on me, because I love them both, and my political verbal skills aren't nearly as refined as yours, I must say. And I was just wondering, where would you take that relationship?
You're saying at the point at where it is now, what would you do?
Yeah.
I mean, it really depends on what your goal is. Is the goal to fix the damage that has been done?
Pretty much, yeah. I'd like to really do that.
Well, I mean, I don't know these people. It's very hard for me to say, but I would try reaching out and saying, I feel terribly about the outcome of our relationship. You don't necessarily have to say, I take back what I said, because it sounds like you don't. And in that case, you shouldn't. I wouldn't lie and say you were wrong in what you said if you believe you were right in what you said. But you could say, I really regret how this went. And would you be open to talking to me? I mean, I don't know that there's really that much more that there's that much more that you can do. You can just say, forget it. You can say, I'm going to wait for them to reach out if they ever do, or you can be proactive. But I don't know that I have any special insight based on the subject matter.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, I'm just trying to reach out and just find people to, you seem like a very reasonable person to talk to about these things. So thank you for taking my call. Just quick little shout out. I really, really appreciate you guys, you and Kyle. I'm from Florida originally. I come from a very conservative background, and I was pretty racist for a long time. So
really?
Thank you guys for everything you guys do. Oh yeah. I was purebred, get these Mexicans out the border kind of thing.
So now get these Mexicans out. What beliefs did you have about Mexican people?
Well, again, I was raised in a Southern conservative family, so just basically all the normal racist tropes that you would hear, they're taking our jobs, they're, dirty, infested people who are just, coming over here to make America not white. I was pretty bad, man. I'm not gonna lie. I've come a long way.
That's incredible. Yeah. And so now when you run into someone that still believes that, are you better positioned to disabuse them of those beliefs or not really?
I've deprogrammed probably 2 people
Really?
that I know of that are my really good friends. Oh yeah, yeah.
Huh.
I had my friend in Idaho was a really big Ben Shapiro guy, and ironically, showing him you and Kyle actually brought him around, being like, yeah, these
Interesting.
guys are much more reasonable sounding. Yeah, 100%.
Was there any particular issue where they started to be open to other ideas? Like, was it on, immigration or social issues, economics, where they said, oh, maybe this other set of ideas actually is making more sense to me?
Specifically for just my one friend, I think it was healthcare more than anything.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And how recent was that?
The
Was
other
that
one-
during coronavirus or prior to?
It was pre-coronavirus.
Pre-corona,
I'd say probably
okay.
about December last year.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations. I mean, you've deprogrammed yourself and 2 people. That's already more than most people can say. So I hope that the relationship is rekindled if that's the way you want it to go. And I really appreciate the phone call.
Thank you so much, David.
All right. Take care. Tough situation there. That's a tough situation. Let's go to the next caller from the 303 area code. Who's calling today from 303?
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
I can. Who's this?
Hi. So I just go by T. I'm originally from Colorado, currently living in Massachusetts on the North Shore. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. And you said like the letter T is the name you go by?
Yes.
How'd you get that name? I'm curious.
Oh, just a shortening of my name. To be honest, I'm trying to anonymize my political opinion because I find that I've actually suffered some career setbacks by virtue of sharing my politics online.
Really? Are your politics left
Yeah.
or right?
I'd say progressive left, libertarian.
And in what industry or field can you say generally have you been hurt due to those beliefs?
So I've been in software, in product management.
In software, being progressive hurt you. That's interesting. That's not, I wouldn't necessarily assume that.
Well, it's part of the sort of corporate infrastructure of the world.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, well, what's on your mind today?
So I guess by way of sort of quick exposition to my main question, have you heard of the concept of federal decentralization?
Federal decentralization. I mean, maybe, but not by that name. What specifically do you mean by it?
Yeah, so fair enough. So there are several types of federal government or government decentralization, but the sort that most interests me is a political and regional one, which in practice would mean basically reducing federal government authority over policymaking and delegating it to a smaller number of regional subsets of the federation that are more aligned in terms of like politics and culture and history.
Sure.
So I've been working on this project and I've identified 5 such regions, and the closest analogy, though it's probably by no means perfect, would be the COVID-19 regional coordination pacts among states, which hasn't really come up much lately, but I'd apply that to sort of the political system as a whole.
So
like
what would the
not a perfect
regions be?
analogy.
You've got New England plus New York, New Jersey, right? That would be one region, sort of the Northeast.
So so essentially it'd be like the Boston Washington corridor, and probably extending a little further to northern North Carolina, which is by far the most like liberal, for lack of better terminology, part of North Carolina. The second would be the West Coast, but including some inland territory, the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains and through northern New Mexico, and southern Arizona would be the second one. The third would be basically the center of the country, essentially. The fourth would be essentially what we call kind of most of the Midwest, but including upstate New York, Vermont, and northern New Hampshire and Maine. And the fifth would be the basically the Southeast, but it's basically been sort of lacking for representation in federal government due to state boundaries.
Okay. I mean, I guess I could take issue with a couple things there. Number one, that West Coast region is including some pretty dramatically different areas. You've got the ultra liberal parts of the country and also extremely rural conservative parts the way you've done it. I also would, the idea of also dividing states where part of Vermont is in one region, part of Vermont is in another. Maybe it's a little complicated, but okay, I understand the framework. So now I think we can get to the question piece.
Yeah, so really, I was mostly just interested in, in this time that we live in where we're sort of have very different approaches. It's a very polarized world, very polarized country, I should say, where we have these very different approaches to COVID-19, to the racial justice protests, and sort of the proper response to them. I'm just curious if you think this model as a whole, whether or not we agree on boundaries, is an open question, but sort of the approach as a whole. I'm just interested to hear kind of your perspective.
Well, listen, I'm not like a secession type guy where I think the country should necessarily be split. I think that the level of chaos that would cause and bring up a whole new bunch of immigration issues. So I'm not like a big divide up the country into different countries type of guy. However, particularly during coronavirus, listen, New England plus New York and New Jersey are running coronavirus response one way. What's happening in the Southeast is completely different. I mean, it has nothing to do with it whatsoever. And the U.S. is so big that, really these regions are like European countries in many ways, sometimes geographically, sometimes in terms of population. So I do think that there are significant enough cultural differences in business, the primary businesses of different areas that it intuitively makes sense that we should be thinking of the U.S. more regionally. Now, the thing is, we already have 50 states. So you could say we already do that. States' rights, 50 states, each state can do what's right for them. But that doesn't, what I think that ignores is that there are certainly groups of states that are very similar in a lot of ways. The states with, the best health and education systems often are close together. So I like this idea of thinking about some problems more regionally without saying we've got to secede or divide up the country. I think the devil is in the details, but I'm very open to that.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, no, I think just one point of clarification. So I'm actually not in favor of, secession.
Oh, yeah. No, I wasn't saying I was saying it more so people don't think I'm saying split the country up in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I formulated under this federal decentralization model. But if I might just plug quickly, so I've started a project on Twitter called the Decent Fed Project, at Decent Fed, PROJ. If you or any of your listeners want to check it out, it's just, like I say, I come from a software background, so I'm kind of a systems guy. So I'm interested in kind of new approaches to governance that might, improve the situation in this country. And in all honesty, like with how polarized we are, maybe diffuse some of that by saying, this part of the country is more progressive on economic and civil issues and civil liberties issues, and this part of the country is more conservative. Maybe a way to resolve that discrepancy is allow them to kind of go their own way a little bit in terms of their policy making.
Yeah, and as we've seen with coronavirus, there's nothing to stop a group of states from saying we're going to work together and just basically have the same policies on this set of issues or that set of issues. So I think legally it's also far cleaner than some of the other things that are proposed. All right, T from the North Shore. I appreciate the phone call. That is going to do it for live calls today. Let's go to a break and we'll be back right after this with more Friday Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Whether you're looking for David Pakman Show coffee for your Chemex or French press or a David Pakman Show t-shirt, it's all available on our website, shipping to anywhere in the world at davidpakman.com/gear. Don't miss the bumper stickers too. davidpakman.com/gear.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get right into audience questions today. First one is about these so-called secret Trump voters. Hey, David, I keep hearing about shy or secret Trump voters, sometimes called the silent majority. Is this really a thing? Do the polls not understand or account for Trump voters who simply aren't willing to say they are going to vote for Trump. So listen, in broad strokes, the answer is that the secret Trump voters don't really exist. There are people who point to 2016 and they say, look, the polls were so wrong. People clearly weren't telling pollsters that they were planning to vote for Donald Trump because they felt some kind of public shame or they were embarrassed or whatever the case may be. The polls were basically right in 2016. Hillary was winning by 3 in the popular vote. She won by 2.2. These states, like, I believe that there was one state that really was wrong, but for the most part, the battleground states that were close, the margins of error were accounting for the actual results. So 2016 doesn't really give us evidence that there were secret Trump voters. The idea being they hide their preference from pollsters until they actually go out and vote. A big difference between 2016 and 2020 is that I don't know why someone would be particularly unwilling to admit today that they plan to vote for Trump in a poll. Remember this, your family, your friends, nobody's going to find out how you voted in a poll. A lot of the polls now are completely automated. So it's not even that you might be embarrassed to tell the pollster that you're planning on voting for Trump. There really would be no reason why, if I get a poll and says, this is, SSRS, press 1 if you plan to vote for Biden, press 2 if you plan to vote for Trump. Why would I be shy about just answering truthfully there? The only argument that could be made would be Trumpists have coordinated to claim they are voting for Biden in order to give Biden a lead in the polls, which will motivate more Trump voters to get out and vote in November. It's a complete argument. It's a post hoc argument made to justify something we don't actually have evidence for. And it makes no sense to me whatsoever. There were no, there's no evidence that there were more shy Trump voters than there were shy Obama voters or shy Hillary Clinton voters or whatever. Certainly there is a significant cultural divide in this country where there could be social stigma at work from being one of the few Trump voters. If you work at some tech firm in Austin, Texas, a state that's likely to go to Trump, but Austin is much more blue, maybe you might not tell your coworkers that you're going to vote for Donald Trump, but why would you lie in a poll? Your coworkers would never know that. So my sense is it's not so much that what could turn the election would be that Trump has way more support than the polls say because of secret Trump voters. What's more likely to me is that there is a part of the base that doesn't get involved until election time. And maybe they are more prevalent on the Republican side than the Democratic side. Maybe Joe Biden's support is fully represented in the polls, but some Trump support is still sitting out there as I don't know, or third party or whatever, because people aren't necessarily paying attention yet or whatever the case may be. I'm steel manning the argument. I suspect that that would be a small portion of the electorate. And I don't imagine that you are going to see any significant amount of shy Trump supporters or reticent or maybe embarrassed Trump supporters who are going to vote for Trump in November, but for one reason or another are lying to pollsters today. Last thought. The other argument is it's not that there are shy Trump supporters. It's that Trump supporters are skeptical of polls, so they opt out. Well, the polls are normalized and adjusted to make sure that the samples are representative. If you were, imagine that you had trouble getting Trump supporters to respond because they hate pollsters. And so you would think, oh, well, you're underrepresenting Trump supporters in the poll. No, you just adjust and normalize the sample to account for that. And pollsters have a number of different methods that are scientifically, statistically acceptable in that case. If we're wrong, then we will know very, very soon. Hey, David, do you think that Donald Trump's new tone around coronavirus, taking it more seriously and wearing or carrying around the mask is going to help him turn the election around? I don't think so. No, I mean, I think it's too little too late. For the first 4 or 5 months of coronavirus in the United States, Trump continued to say everything's fine, refused to wear a mask. Masks are, it's your choice. You can wear it or not wear it or whatever. We have 15 cases. It'll soon go to 0, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the last 10 to 14 days, We saw Trump with a mask out in public. He keeps it in his suit pocket during his coronavirus press briefings to be able to pull it out like a prop at any time. He has actually said some things that are more sober, like it could get worse before it gets better, and on and on and on. Will this turn around the election for Donald Trump? I don't believe so. I don't believe so because, number one, the cat is sort of out of the bag from the standpoint of coronavirus, even if indeed the Trump administration is now covering up cases since the changeover from reporting data to the CDC, instead reporting data to Health and Human Services. We covered that earlier this week. People know that they're unemployed. People know that their friends are unemployed. People know the economy is a catastrophe. People disapprove of Trump's handling of racial issues, which is the third most important issue going into November. So I think Trump putting a mask on now and saying this is tough is simply not going to be enough. Now, could it still be important as far as keeping people safe? In other words, will Trump supporters start wearing masks because Trump has worn a mask? I seriously hope so, because that is one of the most important things that we can do. We covered on a bonus show earlier this week. There's a lot of hygiene theater, restaurants announcing we're going to close an hour early to spray with some disinfectant the entire restaurant or whatever. There's really no evidence that significant contagion is happening through surfaces in that way. Cleaning tables and seating surfaces between guests should be more than enough. So there's like hygiene theater stuff that does not really seem to hold down contagion. Wearing a mask does. Wearing a mask when you're indoors, avoiding crowds, that's the stuff that really matters. And so if Trump carrying his mask around helps more Trump supporters feel okay putting on a mask, then that's great. And I would be crazy to oppose that. And I don't oppose it. Now, there's one other component to this. It is possible that Trump wearing a mask and then more people wearing masks as a result will increase the number of people that feel comfortable going and voting in person in November. Maybe there were people in November who maybe were going to stay home, but now are going to go out. Now, I'm thinking of Democrats. What I mean is the following. If you're a Trump supporter and you're already not paying attention to masks, you're going to go out and vote in person in November. If you're a Democrat and you care about masks and they aren't mandatory or a lot of people aren't wearing them, you might stay home because others don't plan to wear a mask. You seeing more Republicans wearing masks might make you as a Democrat more comfortable going out to vote in November. And that would be great. It would be great if Trump wearing a mask increases everybody's mask compliance, which makes more Democrats feel comfortable going out and safely voting in November. If the death toll goes down significantly, that may actually be what helps Trump the most. And the mask wearing could be part of it, but it's a long path, right? The mask wearing, you need 8 to 10 weeks to flatten the case curve. It's about another 15, 20 days to deal with the deaths. And then we're at election day. So I just don't know that the timing is going to work out. Unemployment going down, stock market continuing to climb, I don't think is going to do very much for Donald Trump in terms of the polls. It really fundamentally comes down to, can Donald Trump avoid another major mistake? Like the response to the George Floyd protest was a disaster. Trump's now more than 20 points underwater on racial relations compared to Joe Biden. Disaster. Trump's early coronavirus response, disaster. Carrying the mask around now, I think is too little too late. The resulting economic damage and the fact that $1,200 is what's gone out to some people, disaster. If Trump can avoid another major mistake, if deaths do start to go down, if the economy does start to improve in a real measurable way, that will help Donald Trump. But ultimately, he's desperate. He knows it. And it is now about lying about the numbers to try to hide them and trying to suppress the vote, which is why we have to work really, really hard to prevent that from happening. We have to overwhelm the vote by so much that the voter suppression Trump is planning to do, won't be enough to hand him a re-election victory. Hey, David, people often talk about if X wins, I'm moving to Canada. What would it really take for you to leave the United States? This is a good question. I mean, remember, so I was born in Argentina, moved to the U.S. when I was 5. Anytime I want to, I could move back to Argentina. The economy is a disaster in Argentina. A lot of it's not exactly a place I would love to be from the standpoint of the virus, although things aren't great in the United States. In Massachusetts, things are pretty good. And Massachusetts continues to be, a good place to live in general. Theoretically, I could move to Israel, and after a year, I believe I would become eligible for citizenship. So if the question is, of the places I could realistically go and move to permanently, what would it take? I mean, things would have to get pretty bad here in the United States, and particularly in Massachusetts. Things have to get worse. We do have a country of 50 states, and living in Massachusetts is very different than living in Mississippi from the standpoint of health, education, climate, business regulation, social issues. It's completely different. If things got really bad in Massachusetts, or I believe that they were going to, I would look at a sort of sabbatical of sorts, not from work. I would just work elsewhere. And depending on the coronavirus situation, Argentina could be a possibility and Israel could be a possibility. Right now, I don't see either of them as places I would move to in the immediate. What would it take for me to permanently abandon the United States? I don't know. I mean, my parents live here. My girlfriend's family is in the United States. Most of my relatives are in Argentina, some in France, some in Israel, some in, different places. My social life is in the United States. I have a US based business, which I could run from another country, but it's certainly easier being here. It would really take a lot. And this is why when we hear, billionaires will abandon the country if taxes go up, maybe a couple of them will. But by and large, people live where they live for reasons. And the longer they live there, the more attached they are to it. And it would really take a lot for me to say, I'm just leaving the United States permanently. It doesn't seem something that I would be likely to do. Now, that being said, I have said, if things were to get very bad in Massachusetts in the fall with the virus, would I look to see, can I, without breaking any rules, can I go somewhere that's doing well, quarantine for 14 days, take a negative test, and sort of just do the show elsewhere for 4 months or 5 months until things settle down? Could it be some picturesque part of rural northern France or something? I mean, that sounds amazing. That is a different story. But in terms of truly just abandoning the United States, it's not likely. And I think we have to be really careful to take too seriously anytime someone says, if X wins, if X loses, I'm leaving the country. Particularly, by the way, when a lot of the people that say that often say they would move to countries that represent what it is they are trying to avoid. You'll hear Republicans say, if Trump wins, I'm leaving the country and going to X, Y, or Z. Well, a lot of those countries, if Trump loses, rather, or if Obama wins, we heard it, I'm moving to X country. Most of those countries are more in the direction of Obama than what some of these people want. Really counterintuitive. And for the most part, these are empty threats that we shouldn't pay too much attention to. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Get instant access by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. We will see you then or otherwise on Monday.